Every president has a defining moment in their tenure.
For the eyes of the world, now look into space.
One that people will remember them by long after their time in office.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
And Donald Trump's greatest accomplishment in his entire 4 years in office was creating the United States Space Force. Wait. Don't click away. Let me explain. The reality is, while it may seem unimportant now, it will go down as one of the greatest, most consequential decisions in all of American history. What Trump did will set a precedent for how we interact with space, how we colonize it, how we explore it, and eventually, how we defend it. And to explain why, we need to wind back the clocks half a century.
All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
On July 16th, 1969, the limits of the human condition were expanded. That was the day of the Apollo 11 launch, a manned spaceflight mission with one prime objective: to land on the moon.
They've got the flag up now, and you can see the stars and stripes on the lunar.
This was the space race era, born out of the Cold War rivalry between the US and the Soviet Union. Both superpowers wanted to be the first to achieve dominance in spaceflight, thereby increasing their presence on the global stage and setting a new standard for the limits of exploration. The Soviets were the first to send a person into space in 1961. In order to get the upper hand, then US President John F. Kennedy declared that the US would not only send a man into space, but land them on the moon and return them home safely.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon.
8 years after Kennedy announced this challenge, Apollo 11 landed on the moon 4 days after launch on July 20th, 1969.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
From that moment on, space was no longer an unattainable goal, no longer the stuff of science fiction. The definition of what was possible had been altered forever, and the limits of our reach into the universe had been expanded. But the space race didn't end there. It was just getting started. In the following decade since Apollo 11, 3 of the world's major superpowers, the US, China, and Russia, became heavily involved in space exploration. All 3 countries have sent manned and unmanned missions into space. But their presence isn't limited to spaceflight. These countries have deployed their own networks of satellites and space stations with a wide range of capabilities. At the same time, the US military became interested in what space could mean for national defense. If we had the technology to put a man on the moon and put satellites in space, maybe we could utilize that technology against our enemies abroad.
Okay.
In 1967, the US military employed the use of satellites for communication and weather, relaying information to their forces in Vietnam. After the success of the Apollo 11 launch, the military continued involvement in the US's space program and would eventually form a space command as part of the Air Force in 1982. Military application of satellite technology proved useful again in the Gulf War and the war on terrorism following the September 11th attacks. All right, let's fast forward to 2018.
My administration is reclaiming America's heritage as the world's greatest spacefaring nation.
Calls for an independent Space Force branch of the military gained bipartisan support. President Trump began promoting the idea, and in 2019 officially launched Space Force as part of a $738 trillion defense spending bill. It's the first time in almost 75 years that a new branch of the military was created.
It is not enough to merely have an American presence in space. We must have American dominance in space.
Trump definitely wasn't known for his elegance in speech, but I think he hit the nail on the head when he said,
Space is the world's newest warfighting domain. Amid grave threats to our national security, American superiority in space is absolutely vital.
Time to see where our curiosity will take us.
When we went to the moon in 1969, it was called the greatest accomplishment in mankind's history. When we built the International Space Station in 1998, Americans celebrated. But when we create a branch of the military specifically designed to protect things like the International Space Station, Americans just laugh? What changed? Almost immediately after it was announced, Space Force was met with mockery and backlash. Initial polls showed that less than half of Americans supported its creation. The internet joked that Trump's latest achievement was closer to a Star Trek or Guardians of the Galaxy ripoff than it was a practical idea.
How does that Vulcan salute go? That hurts worse than the uniform.
The jokes and memes surrounding Space Force went so viral that Netflix decided to make a comedy show out of it.
But this work can be vital. Okay, I can't do it. Are you saying our job is incredibly important or incredibly unimportant? Unimportant, nerd.
But a large part of the mockery surrounding Space Force comes from a place of ignorance. The truth is, not many people know what it actually does. And it's far more important than people realize. Simply put, the primary purpose of Space Force is to protect national interests in space. One aspect of this is satellite protection. America's array of satellites power a majority of the technology we rely on every day, including television and cell phone signals. It relays real-time weather and climate information to monitor global temperatures and natural disasters. Satellite networks also power the Global Positioning Network, more commonly known as GPS. From using Google Maps to get to the grocery store, to first responders who need real-time location data, GPS is essential. And for the military, it's used for navigation, target tracking, missile guidance, and nuclear launch detection. It's vital technology on both a civilian and military level, and operating it and expanding it falls under Space Force control. Having such a major amount of reliance on this satellite technology makes it a huge target for foreign adversaries. Countries like China and Russia have already begun developing and testing anti-satellite weapons, known as ASATs. This technology is capable of defending against missile attacks, but it's also capable of destroying satellite technology on a mass scale. These countries haven't used ASAT technology against the US yet, but they could at any moment. And they've already proved their capability in weapons tests against their own satellites. Other space weapon technologies are being developed by these global superpowers as well. China has been focusing on hypersonic weapons for years now. These missiles fire at around Mach 5, equivalent to 60 miles per minute. General John Hyten said that a recent Chinese hypersonic missile test went around the world and arrived back in China before hitting its target. Other weapons include long-range lasers, jamming frequencies, and kinetic energy ASATs, basically battering rams that would collide with other satellites. But these aren't the only threats. Orbital debris from space garbage is just as dangerous. After Russia destroyed one of its test satellites with an ASAT in 2021, the debris from the destruction almost collided with the International Space Station, moving at around 5 miles per second. We're talking about hundreds of pieces of debris and shrapnel shooting through space at around Mach 5. And this stuff doesn't just go away. Debris from a test satellite destroyed in 2007 in a weapons test by China is still circling Earth today. It's now the responsibility of the Space Force to protect against these potential threats, especially when those threats come directly from foreign adversaries. And that will be a reality sooner than you think. Chief of Space Operations, General John Raymond, said that space will be a necessity in future war scenarios.
A war that begins or extends into space will be fought over great distances at tremendous speeds. I am not confident that we can achieve victory or even compete in a modern conflict without space power. And I am not willing to lose in order to learn.
Similar comments were made by former Secretary of Defense Patrick Shanahan in 2019. Speaking on recent weapons developments by China and Russia, Shanahan said,
"The threat is clear. We're in an era of great power competition, and the next major conflict may be won or lost in space. Space is no longer a sanctuary. It is now a warfighting domain."
Our reliance on space is way more than people realize. Just imagine if the entire US satellite network went out for only a couple of minutes. In those few minutes, our country would enter a blackout, equivalent to an EMP going off across the country. both on a civilian and military level, we'd be mostly incapable in some of the most vital ways. Communication, navigation, banking, national security, even gas pumps wouldn't work. A blackout at that level, even for just 30 minutes, gives our enemies more than enough time to attack our country in devastating ways. Without missile or nuclear launch detection, our military would have no real way of stopping a massive attack. And it wouldn't take long for a nuclear launch from Russia to hit US soil, even shorter for China's hypersonic weapons. That's what makes Space Force so crucial, because space is one of the most consequential factors in the future of our nation. As much as we depend on the technology in space now, imagine how much more vital that will be in the coming decades. With foreign adversaries developing technology as fast as we are, and actively demonstrating it, a literal space war is not out of the question. And that's why Trump's greatest achievement was creating Space Force. In the 1960s, space was the frontier of exploration. In 2023 and beyond, it's the frontier of war.
2, 1, 0.